So you grew up in the Eastern Cape. Take me through that.
Oh my. So I was born in Queenstown, but we were there for like a few years.
Sure.
I think by the time I was a toddler, I said together in Tanzania actually. So most of my childhood, like Kawan bin Buzba, where am I from? I usually say I'm from East London.
Yeah.
Even though Udalam still stays in Koma.
Okay.
Is Benin.
Yeah.
So yeah, I lived in Tanzania for a few years.
Yes.
From 5, we stayed for 15.
Oh, nice.
And then moved to the burbs.
Okay.
And then part of moving to the burbs became like, we had like this twilight moment of being like the black middle class.
Yes.
And then my dad lost his job and things fell apart. So the rest of my life was kind of like always navigating this like urban poverty while going to like this bougie school, like bougie.
Yeah.
So and I was at the same school for 12 years, which really helped.
Yes.
So it was like this kind of mix, and Imonde is nice because it's small, so we used to like walk everywhere, and it still was also this twilight of like feeling safe.
Yes.
So at some point, Saskala equipped me, and we could walk to school, walk back, walk to town, walk to the beach. So it was this kind of mixed experience of having not the best of both worlds, because poverty isn't like the kind of world, but you kind of had this balance of like staying in these like really grungy places, but then Monday morning you go to like this beautiful school that you went to, so you know all about how like beautiful and safe. It was a safe environment. So yeah, that was my childhood really. My dad and my mom were married and then split up when I was in grade 9.
Sure.
So in Tukula, I got 2 older sisters. One like we basically grew up like twins, she's like a year and a bit older than me, and we went to the same school. And then the other one is much older than me, like 11 years older than me, so there was a bit more distance. So when I was starting school, she was going to university, so never quite got to like live together. She was always moving around. So I'm the youngest.
Oh wow. How do you find that?
It's interesting because I mean my other sister and I, the middle sister, Londi,
closer to
she and I often talk about like how between the two of us we like kind of borrow. So sometimes I'm the older sister, sometimes she's the older sister. In the past 5 years, I'd say she's like really taken on the role of being like the older sister.
Okay. Great.
But like growing up, it was like sometimes I take responsibility, sometimes you take responsibility. But on the whole, it's this weird thing where like my family doesn't see me as a fully fledged adult. Like the weirdest thing. So I'm like grown and I'm like living in Joburg. I mean, when was it? So I think it was like not a family reunion, but to say in and my aunt was like, you? Also my nickname Papa. Oh, Papa, come back Joburg. So does Nombizelo, so does I'm just like supporting guys, like all of us. But it's like this weird thing. I'm like, no, you're not grown. Because I think I'm one of the youngest. So it's like, you know, in families, like everyone's kind of, there's a 70s generation and there's the 80s generation. So of the 80s generation, I think I'm one of the youngest. And then now everyone's starting to have their own children as well. So the 80s kids have all started having kids. So yeah, and maybe it's because I'm not that negative. Maybe when I have a kid, they'll probably see me as an adult. You know.
Is that something that you want to do?
No. Well, I mean, I want to adopt.
Okay.
And that's something my family just like doesn't quite understand. I mean,
why?
Well, you know how black people are with adoption.
Yes.
They don't. It's like those abanye abantu. It's like there are no guarantees, which is odd because my grant always had people coming in and out her house. She was always looking after other people's children. It was like a no-brainer. I mean, there was a all my life now I thought don't know only to find out that and it was like never even brought up until there were family fights or whatever. But I was just like, no, baby did this, so it's no big deal. So I really do want to adopt.
Why not your own?
I just don't understand the logic of bringing children into this world. I know it sounds so terrible and doom and gloom and all of that, but knowing what I know, it makes no sense to me. Knowing also because my sister actually works at a children's home in Durban, and the statistics that she tells me, I think just like as an ethical thing, guys, those of us who can, like if I were a dictator, I'd be like, okay, so if you're earning at this level, this is your income bracket, you're only allowed to have 2 children, or for every biological child you have to adopt a child. Like there's just no 2 ways about it. So like it's just something we all should be doing. It makes no sense in my mind.
Yeah.
So the idea is just, it feels illogical. And I know like people who are having their own biological children, that's no don't on their part, because people think like you're knocking their decisions. No, I think fine. If people want to have babies, fine, go for it. But personally, me, I'm decision.
Yeah. No,
if I do, then people must just know by others, killers. I just decided to have an abortion or whatever. I don't see myself doing that.
Okay, no, I completely understand that. I want to go back also to the fact that when you got the Nelson Mandela Rhodes Scholarship, how did that feel?
So that was 2010. Oh my gosh, 10 years ago. And I got that I was doing my master's. I wanted to do my master's over 2 years.
Education, right?
Yeah, it was so bizarre because the Mandela Rhodes Scholarship is like this thing. So it's about leadership development. It's also about like this name, Mandela and Rhodes. And their legacy. So it's like a legacy project because the Ninzi project is obviously underneath the Nelson Mandela name. So on the one hand, a lot of my friends were getting it, and I was like, oh, this thing is for cool kids, you know, those people over there. And then friends of mine were like, you should apply. So it was also one of those lessons of mine of like putting my name forward and actually doing something. Because I was just not about that. The first time I did that was actually SRC, and a friend was like, you should go run for SRC. I was like, what? You got jokes. And then that was the next thing. So it was, I mean, so cliche, but it was cliche. Just in terms of how I saw myself and what the program has enabled me to think about. Has enabled me to navigate certain spaces. So
like what spaces?
So around that time, I was also not so much getting invited. So public space, like public discourse.
Sure.
So people give you space when you say you're a Mandela Rhodes scholar. So at the time, I was writing for. We actually had a blog. Mandela Rhodes Scholarship had a blog on something called Thought Leader. Mail and Guardian had this online blog space which was called Thought Leader, and so I'd been writing. So you get the scholarship, and one of the things they offer is like we also take essays from scholars to be able to contribute to this, and then some of those essays made it into the actual Mail and Guardian newspaper. So I'd never thought of myself as like writing for newspapers. The first time, in fact, kind of coalesced around the same time, was writing for a Daily Dispatch in Mont. And so I'd write op-eds, and I was like, oh, this is cool, people are taking my writing seriously. So that was, I mean, Daily Dispatch is a regional paper. So writing for the Mail and Guardian Thought Leader, and then writing for Mail and Guardian was like,
mind-blowing.
I just never seen myself as being that person. So it gave me that space, and then off the back of that, they were like, you're writing a lot of articles for the Mandela Rhodes one, don't you want your own? And so then I had my own space, and people, like the number of times people have referenced the stuff that I wrote there. Now, I don't know, they stopped Thought Leader a while ago, Mail and Guardian, which I think was unfortunate actually, because it was the one space where young people were getting access to write their ideas. But I think some of the, I don't know in terms of like an online archive if it still exists, but that was a nice space because it was quite vibrant and we took ourselves so seriously. And then kind of getting off the back of that, if I'd written something, getting invited to Power FM to go be in and then listen to it made me think about participating in public discourse, because at the time there weren't actually a lot of black women kind of writing opinion pieces, and now that's kind of that's what I'm doing in my work, where I'm looking at how do black women participate in public discourse dating from as early as the 1800s. So it's kind of like, it was like the first time where I was participating in the very thing that I'm actually going to end up analyzing.
That makes sense.
Take
me through your PhD, because we're there now. I found it interesting actually when I was reading up on what's her name again, Noni Jamal, and how like you are studying her memoirs, if I'm not mistaken, and you know, just I think even I saw one of the pieces that you wrote about how women, there's a constant erasure like of women in our history and in terms of the writing, their political movement. So take me through that, like your interest in that and how that began.
So after the masters, I decided to teach, and I taught English high school for 5 years. Partly just like take a break, But also I'd always really wanted to be a teacher, and I'm glad I did that. And so when I was starting to think about PhD, initially I actually did an education PhD, and then it didn't quite work out. And so I deregistered, took another break, and then eventually, I say it was serendipitous, but it feels like it was a good thing that I let that education PhD go, and it was me starting to pivot back into higher education.
Sure.
So I knew I was leaving the classroom, but I wasn't quite sure about like what kind of project did I actually want and what would sustain.
Yeah.
So I just moved to Joburg, I think, and
teaching UP, right?
Yeah, no, I moved to Joburg. I was teaching at St. Mary's. So I was coming to the end of my time at St. Mary's, and I went to an antique bookshop in the 144 Stanley.
Yes.
So I'm like wandering around.
Yeah.
And then I find, and before I'd only ever read copies of Abanyabantu of Nonija Baba's books. I didn't have my own copies. And it was weird for me. I was like, surely we should have had a reprint or a republish of this woman, because it obviously contributes to this idea that black women have never written who can't see, feel and touch their work.
Yes.
So get to this bookshop, I find one copy, I'm like, this is weird. And then it was like a pile of books. And then so I picked through the pile again and I find the other copy. And for me, it's almost significant that I found those two copies together at the same time. I was like, this is like a sign that this is what I need to be doing. So that's how I came to that project. But as I was reading, because obviously part of a PhD is you read around the text, I was like, there's definitely something there. And I'd met a friend of mine, we're now friends, Makosa Zanfala, was doing the biography, and I was like, how do I turn this into a question? Like, what is my thing? What is this woman contributing? What is she telling us about her context, about her times? Because memoir is a very specific thing.
Yes.
So, and because I was going back into like literary studies, and I wasn't quite sure. It was like, well, it's non-fiction, but it's a memory, but it's a narrative of a life. So how do you analyze that? So then I thought, well, and then around the same time I'm having these conversations, also Songe Msimang published her book, Always in Another Country.
Sure.
So then I thought, what if in fact, the reason I ended up including Mrs. Songe in the PhD was because I'd been quite less critical of Unoni.
Yeah.
Obviously because she's like a first, and not so much I wanted to be generous, but I was just gushing over her because she's, so important. The trailblazer. So we gush and we don't like see the blind spots.
Yes.
But then once in a Songe, and I'd been reading Songe's other work from Daily Maverick and so on, I find myself being like quite overtly critical. I'm like, what is this happening here that isn't happening with this person? So then I thought, well, let me put them together, because then maybe I can have a balance.
Yes.
So that I'm not just gushing over this woman, but I'm actually offering like an intellectual probing or prodding of sorts that isn't just like, look at all the amazing things she did. That's lame.
Yeah.
So then it's the way I describe or try to describe the PhD is that it's a conversation between a historical writer and a contemporary writer.
Sure.
Because I see Unoni Chababu as sort of a literary ancestor to people like Osisonke. So there are lots of young black women kind of releasing memoirs, and said not to get too much into like the literature that I did, but the history of memoir for women kind of starts in the 80s and then lulls a bit and then starts again in the sort of late 90s, 2000s.
Sure.
So also get that generation of younger writers, how do we locate them within a tradition?
Yeah.
So it helped me to do that, to say, well, look, there's a whole sect of young black women writing about their lives, but we have to see them in conversation with the women who are writing in the 80s.
Yeah.
But even more so, Unoni kind of appears in South Africa in the 80s because her 1960 book, The Oka People, was published in South Africa in 1982, but she had actually already published in 1960 and 1963.
Yes.
And the 60s are like significant because it was like independence, it was the feminist movement, it was all these things happening. And so what does it mean for a black South African woman who's lived all across the world to be this person who publishes in 60 and 63, given that context? So that's what I was trying to do there. So I look at home, exile and transnationalism, because they kind of both write about those ideas.
Sure.
And like the bigger idea is this idea of belonging and identity, and like where do we belong? And I think that's like the human question.
Yes.
Like what makes us human? What makes me want to belong to a particular place and not a particular place? How do I navigate being South African but living in another country? How do I navigate where I feel like I belong? What is home? So they pose those questions for me, Bobabi.
And what do you think? I mean, it's interesting that you speak about both of them and you compare them. I think that was like a very good idea. But the other question that I have is, why do you think we don't write as much? Because I often find that like maybe exposure to a more like I want to say this in a cleaner way, maybe like a more, I don't know, like if you have the Mandela Road Scholarship, or you as Mr. Babu did, you experience Europe and things like that, then women tend to be more inspired to write. If that makes sense. It's not every day that you hear that someone who grew up in the township, went to a township school, went to, I don't know, a DUT, I don't know, and then like, is writing as well as you are. Why do you think there's that discourse?
Sure. I mean, obviously, knowledge production is a class project.
Sure.
So it's about who gets access to what.
Okay.
So it's not a mistake that for a long time, even when we look at intellectual traditions in our country or even in other countries, they're very much linked to middle class people having access to things.
Yes.
So even if we look at, the way that we were taught the Renaissance as Skolweni, all those people who were kind of the Renaissance people came from a particular class.
Okay.
And then in South Africa, we see it as well because of our history, that the people who start the black intellectual tradition are people who had gone to missionary schools, and all those places. And I think more recently, I'd say maybe in the past 20 years, we've been able to disrupt that classness in this thing because now we have blogs.
Sure.
People are not as the publishing sector, whole other thing, but that's also classed and raced in its own ways.
Definitely.
So it matters that there are very few, and most of them are independent publishing companies, black owned, and even people are like, what do you mean by black owned? Sort of publishing black stories. So it's all about our history, about how we've come to access certain things. So even someone like Unoni Jabavu, for her, it was like a no-brainer that she would be a writer, because that's what everybody in her family did. Her grandfather was a pioneer, first black man to own a newspaper on the continent. Her father was a professor, her mother was a social worker and a writer. Her other aunt had written one of the first pioneer journalists when she couldn't find a job in the 1880s, and so in old days, ended up working for her grandfather. So her whole life, and she writes a lot about like her class position allows her certain privileges. So that's the historical part of it. The other, I guess, more contemporary or maybe practical considerations of it is that writing requires time and a room of one's own. So if you think of, and a friend of mine, Wazola, talks about this a lot, it's like, if you think of the average black woman's life, if she's writing on Facebook, she's written a lot. Like that's where she puts all her thoughts, because that's what she has access to on her phone or whatever, and now has finally got some time between the commute home. I mean, maybe that's not even the average black person, that's just a regular poor working class person. So this idea, Virginia Woolf writes about this idea of a room of one's own. Women need time to be able to write. So between the commute and your work, if you've got children, where do you find the time? If you've got a demanding job, if you've got family responsibilities, and those things that we organize, those weddings that we're organizing, and all those things all take away from the time of just being by yourself to think. So first, just like, let me think, what am I actually going to write? And a friend of mine talks beautifully about like, he's designed his whole life around this idea of, I spend more time thinking. So by the time I get to the writing thing, it's like, I've done so much work already. So, I was just listening to a podcast, this woman, Sandra Cisneros, she talks about solitude and quietness as being sacred. How many of us actually have that time? If you think of English, it's if you're in a home, you're sharing a room with someone, you're sharing a bed with someone, which is how I grew up. Where do you get the time to write? So I guess I was lucky in that because I took the academic route. My life, I've been able to curate that life for myself, because I'm like, guys, this is my KPA. Like, I need to do a PhD because my job demands it. The regular person, their job doesn't require them to have a PhD or to be writing or to be an academic citizen or all these other things. So how do you then curate a life around that? And then the money part of it. Writing doesn't make money in this country or in many places. The people who make money of it are like the big winners and the Chimamandas and all those people. So it's also a financial thing. It's like, who can afford to be a full-time writer? Unless you've got a trust fund or something, and your whole life is kind of designed around that. So most of us are kind of doing it as a side project. I know how lucky I am. Someone had to remind me as well. It's like, it's rare that your job is what. So when I say I work 3 days from home or 2 days from home, I'm genuinely sitting at my desk writing or reading. And for me, reading is work. And partly I was also lucky in that my dad was a reader. So the first thing, I mean, I had a library card by the time I started the school reading of A. So even that kind of having that culture is that reading time, no more necessarily wasn't or whatever. Reading time was carved out time. Library time. When I said I'm going to the library to my man, I did his but like now I'm going to the library because y'all gave me the library card. It's within walking distance. We know it's a safe space. All of that then created an identity in my mind that I can access this. I can do this. I can spend time doing this because my life has been curated around this kind of life. But it's not it's not something. I see why not everybody can do this. It's borderline impossible. Given the kind of lives that we live.
And how do we get then more women into academia and spaces where they can write?
Sure. So I'll talk about the program that I'm on, which is, I keep telling people, I'm like, it's the one thing that we don't talk enough about, but like government did right. So it's one of those policies that I'm like, and I guess other people will be like, no, the fact that it's one of those things. So I'm on a program called the New Generation of Academics program.
Sure.
So they basically sat down and they're like, look, we can't get these young people into academia. How do we do it? Well, you create a program for them. So there's going to be some mentoring in there. There's going to be, so you track, you need to, the thing about an academic, and I'm only talking about that track, I'm not talking about like being a writer in general because I think that needs different support. So you say to them, okay, fine. So I applied because I'd already had a master's.
Sure.
And so the first they say is, okay, well, fund your PhD. That's like a weight off my shoulders because funding postgrad, So already I'm like, okay, fine, money. I take this notice, it's not a money from my salary, money that's separate. So there's your salary package and then there's the extra package.
Lovely.
So the extra package, PhD for 3 years, and then Bati, they're going to give you money for conferences, and then they're going to say, look, for you've got 5 years in this program. The first 3 years we'll give you so that you can do your PhD. But also, that 3 years you're not doing a lot of teaching.
Sure.
So it's designed that it gives you space, because they understand that part of the problem is that abantu abanaso is space to write. Then we'll start increasing your teaching in the next 2 years.
Okay.
So then you've got a mentor.
Nice.
Who's helping you understand and navigate higher education and which committees should you be on, which issues should you fight, who should you be listening to, who should you not be listening to, who do you email when you want something to get fixed in your office, who do you email when you want to get access to funding, all of those things. And so again, it's this idea of curating. So it's a track. So the reason why I could even see myself as being an academic is someone also sat me down and was like, we think you should be an academic. And at the time, part of the problem is, so NSFAS, I've been definitely on NSFAS for 3 years. What we don't take into account is that Aikumali honors. So we say we want people to be academics. You pretty much have to actually track them from first year in order for them to get to being an academic. Particularly if you want people who are from working class backgrounds. Because once you degree, you're going to work. Now you must explain to them, actually, who honors, who masters, PhD, like the biggest frustration in my family is like, you're still at school? Like my niece and nephews is like, what? And I guess I was lucky in that, at least when I was doing my master's, I had this full-time funding from MRF. And in this one, it was a salary position. So I get paid like an employee because I'm still doing some teaching. I'm within the system. I'm not a teaching assistant. I'm an employee. So again, they know that that's important for people who come from families like ours, is that these people need to have these benefits so that they can do this thing. So then you want to be able to track that. You want to be able to, deciding someone at honours level at the end of undergrad that they should become an academic, it might work, it might not work. Some people kind of also just fall into it because that's just what's been available to them, and those are the doors that are opening because they can't find jobs, but they're finding low money from scholarships and all of that. But you almost, from the conversations I'm at least having with my former students who are honours, I'm like, if you're going to do honours, take seriously that you're doing a master's. By the time you get to a master's, you need to have decided if you really want to do this academic thing, because now you must choose your project, and you find your track, and you find your beat, basically. So part of it is just creating systems for people to be able to do this. On the general side of how do we get more people to write, I mean, having been a teacher, I also know we teach writing so badly in schools. Yeah. So we also don't create the kind of environments from as young as children are to just enjoy writing as something that they can see themselves as like an identity thing. So like, I am a writer, because some of that comes with that, because half the job of being an academic is just like this self-consciousness and like this ego and like this insecurity about our writing, because we have to put it out into the world. So when I was a teacher, or maybe I should say part of my education was, the first time I saw myself published was in a school magazine. Yeah. And I didn't realize how important it was for me to have seen that, because then for the rest of my life, or the rest of my school time, I believe that writing is something we all do. Yes. Not only that, it's valued. Yeah. So then we all get to publish our work in a safe community where our parents get to see it, and our teachers get to talk about it. Our school used to have all our work kind of plastered all over the place, so now we all, like, you write a poem and it gets stuck up on a wall alongside with other people's poems. So we value writing here. Yes. This is how we process the world. This is how we enjoy the world. And so by the time, I guess, the blogging starts happening, I already have 12 to 15 years of, this is what we do. Yeah. I mean, yes, we teach writing as an assessment tool, but a lot of the writing I did when I was in school was not writing as an assessment tool, it was purely for enjoyment. Yeah. Purely. And then I become a teacher, I'm like, you mean to tell me I must assess all these children's writings? When do they just write because that's what we're doing today? Because that's the learning process, is that we prioritize and we that's how we think and process the world. It's one way, there are many ways of processing the world, but we're going to value this. So when I was in, I was the person on the other side, I was like, we're doing something really odd here. So I used to spend a lot of time, because I was in a school where for 3 years where we could kind of create our own curriculum. It's like, let's try to just find ways of getting our kids to just write for the sake of writing. Yes. So not everything is an assessment tool. Yeah. Whereas I think a lot of what happens in schools is that I mean, the worst thing, and my kids were right, they'd be like, you mean you're going to mark our poems? Yeah. I'm like, it's awkward. And at some point I was just like, when I looked at cats, I was like, actually we don't have to do that, but yes, we must write poems, expose them to a variety of ways to play with words, because also writing is playful. Yes. It's not always just like, I must write an argument. Yeah. So I think that's like the whole, again, starting as young as possible. But there are other people who access writing in different ways. I mean, there's the woman who wrote, I just forgotten the title, I want to say her name is Ududu, but I haven't followed her story. I just saw one interview of hers. She wrote Flomo and the Wife. Yes. Very popular, and I'd be interested to find out what her story is. And then it's also larger around self-publishing. So she was just like, but these publishing houses don't recognize what I'm doing because I'm not writing for their white audiences, I'm writing for my people. Yeah. So she did something different there. So there are plenty of examples, more and more, of people just being like, actually I can do this. Yeah, and her books are doing so well. Yeah, dude. I have a copy myself. Actually. I mean, everyone is raging about them, and what's interesting about her is that she kind of describes this process where exclusive books had to find her, because we were walking into exclusive books and like, we're looking for this woman's book, and they were like, no, we don't have it. Yeah. And then they had to go find it, like, we want some of your books. But she had done so successfully on Facebook with that. So again, we know that people are creating different channels for their writing. Yes. Speaking of writing, you write really well. And something I noticed as well is that you mix language as well. My first question would be,
how do you write so well? Like, I know it sounds really, but I mean, can people learn to write? Because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I'm not like a good writer. Is that something that's improved over time? And the second question is why do you write bilingually? Why is that important for women?
I'll start with the first question. Writing is a practice. So
Sure.
I haven't always been this good at writing. And like a typical writer, I'm like, I don't write that well. I write I write in like a variety. I try to write in a variety of genres, and I know there's certain genres that I'm just not good at. So I'm not good at fiction right now, at least because I haven't given it a lot of time.
Sure.
I'm starting to get into taking poetry seriously. I really like non-fiction, sort of creative essay writing, creative non-fiction. So it's a practice, and I mean, so part of the reason why I even started my own personal blog was because I was doing this master's, and my supervisor's like, you need to find ways of just thinking through your work and what you're researching. So anyone who goes to my first blogs, it was about I was purely about education.
Sure.
So that was the first thing. So that was the practice. So then I was like, oh snap, I have an audience, and now I have to update this thing weekly. And it also kind of builds the muscle of confidence as well. So a lot of the work for me is also just believing that you can do this. I mean, people talk about God grant me the confidence of an average white man.
Yes.
And after a while, you just gotta be like, it's not great, but it's good enough. And that's what I did with my PhD. I said to my supervisor, I need a good enough PhD, and that's fine. So I also kind of try and approach my writing as if it's good enough, if it says the argument, it doesn't need to be flowery, it will never be a Toni Morrison or an Alice Walker or an Ellen Kozai or anyone, but it's now done and it's out there and it's something that I can be proud of. So it's also just working through my own angst about it.
Sure.
And I guess it also goes back to the thing, like grading work. I really had to get out of that mentality. So, and I mean, we were, what was that thing, streaming. So then you end up being in the buff class and you're constantly comparing yourself to flip it over and writing, and you're just so you spend your whole life doing or the whole school life doing that, and when you come out, you're just you don't have to do that anymore. So it's also just working through all those hang-ups and just being I'm not going to write like her, but maybe I can find my own writing voice. So it's just a commitment. So I mean, I don't have I can't say to you I have a writing practice that this is what I do. I read more often than I write. That's the other thing. And then I learned a lot when I was a teacher. Because my students would, I mean, I saw it in practical terms. I'd already seen it in my life, but I couldn't quite articulate it. The thing about writing is there's a particular genre where you can write the way you speak, and that's totally fine. And some people can do that really well, in different tones and different kind of avenues where you're publishing. But what I used to talk to my students a lot about when it came to writing is you can't write the way you speak. Speaking is something different. And there's nothing wrong with the way you speak. But it's just that now that we're going to have a variety of genres that I want to expose you to, I need you, just like a costume. I need you to put on the costume for free writing, or I need you to put on the costume for an argumentative essay. But also when I ask you to write a descriptive essay, don't give me an argumentative essay. So that's just something I guess you learn by reading. Because then you have to expose yourself to all those things. And I think that's the one thing that people don't take seriously enough. So people want to be writers, and they think the writing part of it is the churning out and being look at me, I'm a writer. Most writers will tell you is that you spend a lot of time with your own thoughts, but also just reading other people's work. And so for me, reading and writing are deeply interlinked, and which is why my formative years were all about that. I mean, that thing, you sit in a circle, what did you do over the weekend? You get up from the circle, you go at your desk and you write one sentence. That's your writing. But there's a conversation between what we were doing and talking about in the circle to what we were now writing. That was our writing for the day, I'm thinking except A, and then to come back to the circle, and now we're all reading Jack and Jill, or whatever it was that we were reading, Janet and John. So that was a cyclical process, is that there was speaking, you write about what you were speaking, but you're also reading other people's things to influence your own writing, to influence your experience. So it's I see it as an iterative process. So I guess that's how I've improved as a writer over time. And it was funny because my supervisor, Shane, she was amazing. And she pointed me to this thing because I thought, I'm a writer. You already have a PhD. done this, I've written a few journal articles, look at me.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I need to just switch off your op-ed voice. I was like,
yeah.
She's like, this is a different, and I didn't realize that at this point that I'm still like learning other genres. She's like, yeah. She's like, yes, you've done it, but you haven't done it for like a sustained argument over 180 pages.
Yes.
I need you to sustain an argument. What you do with 6,000 words in a journal article, I need you to be able to do that with 80,000 words.
Yeah.
I was like, oh snap.
Yeah.
So that's what I was doing for like 3 years. My writing from year one was totally different to the writing that I eventually submitted at the end. And she was like, no, you can't write like this. Stop it. And also just like working through the emotion, I'm like, I'm a writer. How dare you tell me that I can't write because I've been doing this. She's like, you're a good writer, yes, but you're now learning a different genre. So that was a really good experience with the PhD as well. So yeah, we're constantly learning how to be writers. The bilingual part of it is, I mean, it's how we speak. And I mean, I have a thing about monolingualism, even though statistically more often than we should.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've been trying to break in my other writing as well. So, that is Xhosa when I was in third year. Okay. So I've done Xhosa when I was in high school, or school at all.
Yeah. I also didn't do it but I was.
I mean, because that's Xhosa Sasenza no Mrs. Nduli in primary school, and you're just like, this isn't chilly, we've been speaking Xhosa since we were children. So it was another way of like distancing us from our language because it was pitched for the white girls and not for us, which really ruined our relationship with this Xhosa. Because you get this impression, well, why do I need to? So then the Afrikaans because of those weird reasons. And then, and I guess it was because of my own kind of political awakening.
Yes.
And I discovered about what was Xhosa Mother Tongue. We were the guinea pigs when it was introduced at Rhodes in 2008. So I joined, it was a nice small class. Yeah. And I liked it because I mean, it's Xhosa Ndansaza Cawe, so funda iBhayibhile neculo. Yes. That helped me maintain that, and that was my mom forcing me to go to black church. Yeah. Because lay down in Goko, you think like you don't have to go to black church. My mom was like, from the South to Risa, and you're going to learn it verbatim and all of that. So that really created a culture where I could see Xhosa as a meaningful means of communication and then like a whole intellectual project. Like for me, the best poems I've heard are the women's prayers in church. Yeah. So I had that kind of exposure. So that's nangona ndangimfundisi labalaba and the grammar of it. Then was just then was just theatre because of my church influence. So I we start in third year and I start Xhosa and I have to write essays in Xhosa. All of a sudden, I was like, what do you mean? But the beauty of it is that Xhosa it's a phonetic, I forget the technical linguistic term now, but what you hear is what you write. Yes. Once you know what the sounds are and what the combination of the sounds are, ilula. Yeah. So I was lucky in that sense. So my life became easier because that was like another building a muscle. So I started buying this as Xhosa, went back to black church, and so it's not just what I do. And I see monolingualism as a political project. I don't think we have any business being monolingual. So I'm also trying to find ways of raging against monolingualism because I think it is a very dangerous idea. It's a colonial idea. The English came here like, no. No, you're not doing that. Yes. Like, what? And I mean, in very weird ways, that's one narrative of what was happening is that they were trying to turn us into this colonial subjects. But what any normal person will tell you is that a regular African is a polyglot. Yes. Speaks on average 3 to more languages. Like, you're fine, we must be monolingual. So even in my writing, I'm like, and it was quite beautiful because I became more and more interested in it when I was doing my PhD. My supervisor is a Ugandan woman. It was just so amazing. She was like, and she would literally, in her comments, she's like, what's the Xhosa word for this? So even in my PhD, it's like, it's infused, so I use like conceptual words. So even though I wrote about Ekhaya and home, exile and transnationalism, my chapter titles are in this Xhosa and then I kind of do a footnote. So I wrote about Ekhaya, exile is ubaphandle, and I kind of theorize around that and what that means in various situations. So exile, estrangement, and then nationalism's idea of
Yeah.
that's in my thesis.
Yes.
Like it's not even like it's not a thing.
Wow.
And she really was amazing at getting me to like do that kind of, especially because Noni Jabavu does the same thing. So it was also this thing of like, if I'm writing about a woman who, I should have bought her books, yes. If I'm writing about this woman who in her author's note kind of says, look, this is how I've written this book. It's really weird that I would be expected to write in English alone.
Yeah.
So where I haven't been able to write in English, I've used this clause. She's publishing for a London audience, but she could do that because she understands the nuances of language.
Yeah.
So it also was just like, I mean, the fact that if French would like say rendezvous did not exist as a word. We made it a word that exists. And it's just, I feel the same way with other African languages that we say, look, this thing doesn't exist in any other language. We're going to take it on and make it ours.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of languages. And I think African languages we need to make them be able to do that.
I agree.
Not as a nice to have, but because that's what language does.
Yes.
You know, it's a no-brainer that English is made up of Greek, Latin, and French.
Yeah.
And some Anglo-Saxon words.
Yeah.
That's what language does. So when we say English is the great, we're like, no, it actually stole from people to be able to be this language.
Yeah.
And that's the normal thing about it.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to experiment with that.
Okay. No, I think it's important work. I second to last question. I think it's called Women Writing Africa. Tell me about that. Where can people find it?
Oh my gosh, story of my life. I was actually using some of it today in the meeting I had before this. It's this amazing anthology series that has kind of petered out, but basically it's a 4-part anthology.
Sure.
There's a southern region where researchers from Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, I think Tanzania as well, sort of this region, try to find texts from women from as far back. So the southern region one, I think the earliest extract they've got from the 1700s. Then there's the eastern region, which is Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, I think some of the Zanzibar, some of the islands around there, and the earliest text there I think 1600s, and then the west and Sahel, and then the north. So the earliest text in all of them is 6th century BC from Cairo. Wow. So over time they just collected songs, letters, speeches, press conference articles, a whole lot of things. And they kind of compiled it into this book, and it's chronological, so from the earliest text to the most recent.
Wow.
The unfortunate thing about it is that they haven't reproduced it since it's been more than 10 years now.
Oh wow.
So I've been trying to email the people. So the original publishers are based in New York, called Feminist Press.
Sure.
And the idea was, so Feminist Press kind of holds some of the rights, but then they divvy it out in a way. So South Africa, Wits Press was responsible for publishing it. I can't remember who was responsible for the eastern one and the western one. And I think part of the reason why it started is because people have forgotten about how important it is.
Yeah, and it's so important.
It is. So it's like it's a repository of sorts in a book form. It's an archive in a book form. And I because I'm kind of working in the space now, I've noticed that a lot of people are doing this in website form. So UNESCO has a website for women in African history. Beautiful. BBC started a series for women who changed the world. Friends and I have started a collective called Asna Botula, using Women Writing Africa as a starting point to say, look, these stories exist, but it's limiting if we can only have them in this book form. So what does it mean for us to share? And what does it mean to be in conversation with texts from the 6th century BC?
Yeah, definitely.
And particularly as South Africans, the way we just like ourselves mix our continent. And so now I'm thinking about women in Uganda who are doing the very same thing that we're doing right now with our gender-based violence movement. In the 50s and 60s already, writing, petitioning, protesting, going to court and all of that, and then like getting involved in the women's movement. So all of those things for me are in conversation with each other. So I'm trying to find ways of like making it come back.
I really wish you all the best, because I think it's so important that we don't forget. I even study the women who were great public speakers that we never hear about, like Oyudin Goya, and were really interesting. But anyway, my last question is, what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
So, a friend of mine invited me over for Christmas, this past Christmas.
Sure.
Well, it was a Christmas Eve dinner.
Okay.
And she loves Christmas, she like goes gung-ho. So we didn't know that she was getting us presents. So she comes and she divvies out these presents, and she had done, she put our books in envelopes, and on the envelope she done like a little artwork, or not artwork, like a quote. She had written the person's name and like something about that person on the envelope. And on mine she wrote, Atta, one who champions untold stories.
Wow.
And I cut that out and I framed it, because I think that's what I want to be. I guess that's what I want to be. So for me, it's like, first of all, she captured what I'm doing.
Yes.
It's like, oh my gosh, and I got all teary about it. I was like, I can't believe you like got it.
Yes.
And I've been like thinking about it for myself, like how do I succinctly just tell people what's my research focus, or it's like my mission.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be remembered for championing untold stories and finding and making them meaningful. And yeah, so the one woman who's really, really inspired me, I guess this is part of championing untold stories, is Women's-Impoto. She has a line, she was a 1920s poet, wrote in Xhosa in newspapers in Johannesburg, and she has a line from her poems, Asinakuthula umhlaba ubonile. So it's this idea of like, we can't keep quiet, we know that these stories were there, and also follow that hunch when someone says to you, black women haven't done this before.
Yes.
I'm like, there's nothing we haven't done. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to go sit in an archive and I'm going to page through newspapers and I'm going to find not for you, but just to be like, for me as well. Like, we've done this. I don't need to even like have a conversation with you about it, because I know we've done it. So yeah, I think that's what I want to be remembered for.
Well, that's great. Please do continue to tell the untold stories. Thank you. Okay.